So again, I'm Steve Sharp, Vermont Center for Geographic Information. I'm the GIS Operations Manager here, and I'm going to be talking about geospatial web services. The topics that we're going to touch on today include what is a geospatial web service, services hosted by VCGI, how to find services hosted by VCGI, things to consider when using services, using services from within your desktop GIS package, and then using services to create web maps. So there's plenty to cover here, so let's get going. So, what is a geospatial web service? Geospatial web service is just a web service. And a web service is just a way for two applications or devices to communicate with each other across the internet or the web. A web service is an implementation of a service-oriented architecture, and this simple diagram gives you an example of a service customer making a request, and I think I may have my arrows reversed here. So the request would come from the customer and go to the provider, and there would be a response back. Sorry about the reversed arrows. So a web service is just an implementation of a service-oriented architecture. Now, there are sort of two primary implementations or ways to access and talk to a web service. One is using a method called SOAP, and another is using a method called REST. And I've pulled some definitions that you can see here off the internet. SOAP being a communication protocol with specific set rules and an XML-based communication messaging system. REST talks about an architectural principles of how things are structured and communicated. Now, I'll admit that to a great degree this is Greek to me, but it's important to understand that there are these two sort of distinct methods, and they really play themselves out in these examples here. So for example, ArcGIS Desktop talks to ArcGIS Server web services through the SOAP protocol, whereas the ArcGIS Online and web apps for the most part are going to talk to web services through the REST method. So that's a little background there on theory, and you can always dig in deeper on your own if you really want to understand more about SOAP and REST and web services and service-oriented architectures. So what types of geospatial web services exist out there? Well, in the Esri world, there are a number of them. There are those referred to as map services, and these are essentially a method by which you can take a ArcMap project or an MXD and the content within it and publish it to the web as a web map service. Image services, again, this is all within the Esri lingo. Image services are services that allow and provide access to raster data over the web. Feature services essentially provide a means by which features can be edited over the web. Geoprocessing services perform custom geoprocessing tasks. For example, it might be you want someone to be able to click on a location on the map in your browser application and have it delineate a watershed. And that sort of a intensive geoprocessing task could be handled by a geoprocessing service. Geocoding service is another common example. It's being able to take an address or addresses and be able to identify their location on the map. And there are many more that you will find within the Esri literature as to services, web services that can be published specifically using the ArcGIS server platform. And that's really beyond the scope of the presentation, but there are a lot of other specialized types of services. Now, there are also open source or Open Geospatial Consortium services. The Open Geospatial Consortium is an organization that has been around for quite a while, a good solid 15, 20 years now or so. And they've been in the business of establishing geospatial standards. And so they've essentially defined open source methods by which you can communicate with geospatial web map services. In many ways, they have a direct corollary or crosswalk to the Esri services. So for example, the Webmap service, that what's called WMS, is in many ways functionally equivalent to the Esri map service. The Web Coverage Service, or WCS, is similar to an Esri image service. You have WFS, or Web Feature Service, which is also similar to an Esri feature service. And lastly, you have the Web Processing Service, which is in many ways similar to the Esri Geoprocessing Service. So it's important to understand that not only do we have different protocols such as SOAP and REST, but we have different either proprietary or open source methods to be able to then communicate between the client that's making the request and the service that's making and crafting a response. So let me touch on some of the services hosted by VCGI, and I'm specifically focused on what represents the vast majority of the services that we support and maintain and offer to the public. And these are services that are part of the state's Vermont Enterprise Geospatial Consortium's suite of services. This is a suite of services that was planned and defined by the EGC, and VCGI hosts quite a number of them. So we have a number of map services, and this is not completely exhaustive, but this is the kind of the highlights. We have contour services. Those include just vector contours as well as contours plus hillshade. We have a parcel service that has whatever available parcel data that's been combined into a service. We also have a suite of image services, both for imagery, such as orthophotos, and terrain information, effectively LiDAR information. There's going to be a webinar later this month that will talk a little more about those services. You may note that in these titles here I have a little descriptor or a little asterisk, and this is, you'll see this rear its head later as we step into the presentation, but these are essentially prefixes that we've put on to the names of the services to help identify them a little more. As I continue down through, then we also have a set of geocoding services. These are derived from the 911 data, and they are combined to provide geocoding service capabilities. And we have recently, as sort of a special category, which is part of our new open data portal, we have a suite of open data services that help to drive and support the geodata.vermont.gov site. So how do we build these services? Let's touch on that a little so you can get a little bit of a behind the scenes view of what we do. So when it comes to a map service, we essentially author a map within ArcMap. So I can show you a simple example. Bringing up ArcMap, I have a pre-staged ArcMap document here, and you may see that I've added one layer. This is county boundaries, and I've labeled the counties and all of that. Now, if I wanted to publish this as a service, in the case of VCGI, we have access to ArcGIS Server. So we do a process of going to and sharing it as a service. And we go through a wizard, and I'm not going to go through all those steps right now. That would take a little too much time. But it allows us to go through and configure the service and publish it to the server, which then exposes it out on the internet and makes it available through both the SOAP and the REST protocols. So I have, if you bear with me here, I'll switch over to my screen, which shows the demo. I took that and I went ahead and published it. And if I do a quick little preview here, I can see there it is. It looks pretty much like what I had on my ArcMap screen. I can zoom in, zoom out, do all these things, and certainly there's a lot more that can be done with it. But that's essentially in a nutshell of how we publish and produce a map service. In the end, all it is a ArcMap document that has a variety of data in it that's been symbolized and configured, and that gets published out and made available. The other example I want to show you, I'm going to do a little bit of jumping around here, is the raster data set. So for raster data sets, so for example, a elevation model derived from LiDAR terrain, or it could be ortho photos acquired by the state of Vermont. Those are published as image services. And so let me show you a little bit of under the hood there so you get a better sense of what that's all about. Let me jump over to ArcMap over here. I'm sorry, ArcCatalog. So within ArcCatalog, I have opened up a file geodatabase, and this file geodatabase contains many mosaic data sets. A mosaic data set is a type of data set in the Esri ArcGIS platform that is designed to take multiple raster files, such as, let's say, GeoTIFF files, and mosaic them or combine them into a single image. And so we have built, as you can see here, or at least I hope you can see, quite a laundry list here of mosaic data sets. And this is really the back end behind all of our imagery services that you may be using. And the thing I wanted to highlight about this was not only that this is how it's set up on the back end, these things get pushed up to the server and published as services, but a quick little sort of sneak preview into the guts of this. If I select one of these mosaic data sets here, it will show me the actual contents of what's in there. And as we can see here, all it is just a listing of information. And it's actually referencing other mosaic files within this list. And if we were to look then at one of these individual mosaics, this particular mosaic I'm showing you here is a mosaic of mosaics. If I look at one of the individual, let's say the color 2011, so I'm going to go take a look at the color 2011, and we'll see what it shows. What you'll see here is that you're actually seeing the listing of the individual ortho photo images. This is just a listing at this point. But if I wanted to that information could be previewed on the screen. So as you can see, it's just an index that points to the individual TIFFs on disk, and then these mosaics get combined into parent mosaics that then get published. So that's the quick in a nutshell. And once we have all of this stuff built on the back end, we can then do things such as I'm showing you here, which is I can say share as image service. And that allows me to then publish all of this out there as image services. So I'm gonna leave it at that, but that gives you some sense of what's going on behind the scenes on our end. Let me jump back over to the presentation now and continue. Again, the other kind of service is called the geocode service that we've built out there, and that's built off a locator file. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but if anyone has ever built their own locators, you'll understand what I mean. And in this case, we use 911 data to build our geocode services. There's also geoprocessing services, which is basically either a Python script that has been written, or it could be an ArcGIS model, and those can be published as geoprocessing services. And we don't really have a bunch of those. Actually, we don't really have any beyond what we have built to support some of the custom download options within the GeoData portal, where you can clip and zip a bit of data, or you can clip and zip a bit of imagery. But the details of that will be beyond the scope of this presentation. So let me continue on here. So some things to consider when using web services, either services that VCGI offers or really any services out there. This really is the new paradigm in many ways, where folks are taking advantage of services built by others and mashing that up with their own information. But what you want to consider are, what's the use case for using the service? Are you trying to create custom maps within your ArcGIS desktop or QGIS or whatever your software is that can bring these services in and consume them? Or maybe you're trying to create a web mapping application. Each of these has different implications in terms of the capabilities of the service, in terms of what you can and can't do. And each kind of service has a sort of set of capabilities and limitations. And those are details that you want to pay attention to and determine whether or not you're going to be able to meet your needs. So for example, within ArcGIS Desktop, if you bring in a map service that is a pre-cached map, you can't modify the content in any way. You're stuck with whatever the symbology is, the way it's been set up. However, there may be map services that are configured in a way that within the web mapping environment, you can override the symbology. So I'm not going to get into all those details today, not enough time for that, but it's important to pay attention to those things depending on your use case. Performance, internet connection speeds, this is less and less of an issue these days, generally speaking, but certainly it's a factor and something to consider, especially for mobile devices out in the field. Not only do you have potential issues of speed out in the field, but you have also issues of losing connection, especially in rural areas like Vermont. And of course, the service itself can potentially have performance issues as well. So it's good to be aware of that. And lastly, lifecycle support. Has the service provider, do they guarantee any level of availability of that service that you might have wired into your desktop application, or that you might have wired into your web app? What happens if it goes away? How does that impact your use case? How critical is it that it be available all the time? Do you even know what level of service is provided? Has any level of service been advertised. And let me show you an example of where this comes to play and how VCGI is attempted to address this. Okay, here we go. Let me jump to the web now. And if I go, for example, to the new GeoData portal, we've attempted to, within our, for example, web services section, we have some links to lifecycle policies. And you can see now at the moment there's a policy published by VCGI as well as the Agency of Natural Resources with regard to their web services and other services they provide. So for example, at the VCGI policy, it talks about, you know, what happens when we decide to retire, how much notice do we have to give you. For example, we say we're going to give you 90 days notice, and now we're going to put it out on the listserv. And we list all the services that we explicitly support through this lifecycle policy. So again, often folks just sort of grab and run, and that's okay, but it's also good to take the time to be aware of what level of service is being offered and whether or not there's anything telling you what that level of service is. So things to consider. Let's jump back into the presentation and continue here. See if I have any questions. No questions yet. Okay. All right. So how do we find these things? How do we find these services? Okay. I'm going to talk specifically about those hosted by VCGI. Certainly out on the internet, many ways to go find these things. Sometimes it may be searching arcgis.com. It may be going to websites for the equivalent of the VCGI in other states. Many ways to discover these things within particular GIS desktop software such as ArcGIS. It has tools for searching, arcgis.com, listings, all kinds of stuff. But I'm going to talk specifically about VCGI. So through the portal, there's a section of the GeoData portal which has links to various categories of services. And those will then run searches against the data catalog, the services catalog, and provide listings. And we'll just do a quick jump in there and see. So for example, if I'm here on the portal site and I click on Imagery Services, it's going to run a search and return a listing. You can see it's quite long. I've got 26 entries returned. So you got to kind of sift through here. You can use keyword searches to maybe help you narrow it down. You can do things such as sort on name to see if that can help you narrow it down. So that is one way you can go about trying to find web services that are available through and from VCGI. In this case, these are all VCGI services. None of our other partners at this point have listed their services through the portal, but that can change in the future. Now through ArcGIS Desktop, the best way to connect to VCGI services is to add a connection. So let's go do that real quick. I'll jump over to ArcMap here. And so to add a connection, it's just like adding data. I can go to Add Data, and I have my listing as those of you who use ArcMap, ArcGIS are familiar. You have these various, you got folders, and you got toolboxes and databases and data servers and all these things. GIS servers is the one that you want. So I go to GIS servers. I already got some set up, but I'm going to go ahead and show you real quick here. I want to use a GIS service. So I've selected Add GIS Server. I'm going to go ahead and say Next on Use the Service because that's what I have permissions to access. And then in my browser, I'm going to enter in the link, or I'm sorry, the URL. So maps.vcgi.vermont.gov/arcgis. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared, so you don't need to worry about writing all this down. So if I hit finish, you can see it added a second one because I already had one, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and drill in there, and I'm going to go to my EGC services folder, and now we begin to see the long list of services that we have to offer here. And really it takes some time to explore these and see what services may help you out. It's important to note, as I mentioned earlier, we've applied a naming convention. IMG means image service. The VCGI part is pretty self-explanatory. It just means it's published by VCGI, which is pretty obvious since it's on our server. And then the remainder is part of the naming convention. So it's the name of the service followed by things such as what's the coordinate system, SP is state plane, WM is web Mercator, and then whether it's cached or non-cached. So in this case, for example, maybe I'll select this color infrared, CIR, that's what that is. Go ahead and add it to my map, and voila. I've got instant imagery gratification. Didn't have to download everything, didn't have to organize all that stuff on my hard drive and create my own mosaic data sets. It's all here ready to roll. So that's a simple, the easiest way through desktop is to add one of those connections, and if you do, then it's going to be there from that point forward and should make it easy for you. What you can also do, if you'd like, to make it easier for yourself, is you can save these as layer files. So you can save it on disk to some location where you have your other layer files and give it a user-friendly name like, Vermont Color Infrared Imagery Service. And then later on, you can add it by adding a layer file. So you can refine it on your end to make it a little easier for you as well. So let me jump back to the presentation here to make sure I continue to move on down the line and not run out of time. So the other way is through the REST endpoint itself. So the nice thing about REST is you can actually browse these endpoints. So if I follow this link here, it's going to open up my browser and it's going to take me to that REST endpoint. In this case, again, it's the EGC services hosted by VCGI, and there it is, the big laundry list of services that are available. You can note here it tells you what kind of service: geocode service, image service, map service. Okay, it's just worth noting those things. The kind of service does have impacts on what its capabilities are. So it's good to just be aware that there are differences between them in terms of what they can and can't do. So that's the other way to sort of browse and find what you want. And so, for example, if I go to that color infrared state plane one that I just added to my ArcMap, I can actually take a look at it through here. So, for example, I go to ArcGIS Online. I click on that link. As you can see here, there's links to open it up in different clients. It's also worth noting this tiny font stuff right at the top here. It says JSON, SOAP, WMS, WCS. These are going to come up later as I get into talking about open source, but these are important links to be aware of and often not noticed. So I had selected open up an ArcGIS Online. There it is. Bang, I got my color infrared. Nice to see that Vermont is actually not green, it's red. At least right now on the screen it is. So that's a pretty easy way to go about it, but it does require that you have this sort of like a cryptic URL, saved somewhere. So, I would say bookmark this thing if you use our services on a regular basis. So let's keep on skipping along here. Actually, I may have jumped the gun. I already showed you this. So within ArcGIS, like I said, you add a connection by within ArcMap. You do add data, GIS servers, and you add an ArcGIS server connection. If you don't already have it, you put in this URL, and voila, there you go. And then within the EGC services folder, which is the folder that has, again, the 99% of the services and the services that we specifically support through our lifecycle policy. You want to be able to go in there and take a look and leverage the services that make sense to you there. Let's talk about QGIS a little bit. I know there's folks, quite a number of folks out there using QGIS as an excellent open source option. And so let me step through how you can plug in these services in that environment. So let's go. I know I got a QGIS running somewhere. I hope here it is. Ta-da. So then QGIS, there's different options for adding data on the left side here, one of which is add WMS/WMTS layer. There's also this add ArcGIS maps server layer, but for this presentation I'm going to focus on the WMS, WMTS, which is the OGC, Open Geospatial Consortium web service type. So if I want to, let's say, go back, hold on here, jumping around too much, I apologize for that. Let's go right back here. So I want to say new, so I want to create a new connection to a web map service. So in this case, I'm gonna stick with the theme where I love the color infrared. So I'm gonna give it a name, VCGI CIR image service. Now I need a URL, and this is where you got to pay attention. And this is some technical details that if you're using this, it's important to keep note of and keep track of. So if we go back to our REST endpoint, I had mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about these links at the top, these links to different protocols, SOAP and JSON, a web map service, web coverage service. In this example, I'm going to link to the WMS, the web map service, which is again an OGC specification. Link to that, and then I'm going to take this URL at the top, and I'm going to go back to my QGIS window where I'm creating the new connection to a WMS connection. I'm going to paste that in there. I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to connect to it. Now that I've connected to it, I can select the layer, the layer in there that I want. It's important to note this little highlight here about image encoding. I've noticed through just playing around with it, the image encoding format does matter and will impact your experience with working with it. Generally speaking, I would recommend PNG. It's going to give you transparency, and that's often what you want. So I'm going to select PNG in this case. Go ahead and add it, and there we are. Just as we did with ArcGIS Online, just as we did with ArcGIS Desktop within QGIS, we've been able to add that service. And again, you could repeat that with other services as well and add them on top. So let's go back to the presentation here and continue on. So Webmap. Many different platforms out there for doing and building web maps. You've got ArcGIS Online for those in the ArcGIS Esri world. That's quite common. There are both free offerings through ArcGIS Online as well as paid options. The free offerings have limitations. There are other platforms as well, Mapbox, you've got CartoDB, you've got other possibilities that I'm sure I'm not aware of as well. In this webinar and in this presentation, I'm just going to provide a quick example of being able to pull in web services into ArcGIS Online and share that information. So if I go over to my browser, and let's see, I believe I have an ArcGIS Online map here. Oh, well, it looks like, yes, I do. It's the one I had open before. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to sign into my account. So I'm going to sign in. In this case, this is a paid account. So I'm starting off. I'm gonna, since I have this in here for the purpose of the demo, I'm gonna go ahead and remove it. So let's pretend we have a blank. We're starting off with a blank slate. So if I want to add one or more of those services from web services from VCGI, I want to do the add. So similar to, you could think of it as really like ArcMap or QGIS. You're going to add data. It's just like, in some ways you could think of it as any other data. It's just data that's streaming over the web into your desktop GIS or into your web application, in this case ArcGIS Online. So I'm going to add layer from web. You'll see it defaults here to ArcGIS server, but it's worth noting there's a bunch of other options there. So if you were to get services from other providers other than VCGI, they may offer them in these other formats, and so it's good to be aware that you have other options. Now again, I need a URL. So where do I get that URL? Haha, I know where to get it because I have bookmarked this. So I know I can get back to this and get to the list. So maybe let's switch it up a little bit here and go for some, oh, why not? We'll go for some black and white Web Mercator. So I'm going to take that URL, whoops, and I'm going to go back to my other tab in my browser, and I'm going to stick it in there, and I'm going to hit add layer, and voila. We've got good old panchromatic, better referred to as black and white imagery in my browser. Now let's say I wanted to add more. Maybe I'm curious about the Taft's Corner area. So let's go to Williston, Vermont. Let's see how that works. Haha. That worked, actually worked. Very good. Now let's say I want to take a look at maybe what has happened over time in this area here. So I could, let's go and add one of the older versions of imagery. So this is where it takes a little time to get familiar with this because I'll admit it, it's a bit cryptic, but IMG, VCGI, BW. BW means black and white. So let's take a look at the 94 to 2000. That has all the Vermont orthos from 94 to 2000. If we take that, let's try tossing that into our map. Just go over there, put that in there, add layer. Aha. So we're looking at, right here in this image, we're looking at Taft's Corners, Maple Tree Place. Interesting. Now, we now go to what is there now. Quite a bit different. We got the entire Maple Tree Place developed. So this is just an example of you can add multiple services into a map, whether it's ArcMap, or QGIS, or ArcGIS Online. You can see that we have made an attempt to also offer historical imagery. So in this case, you're looking at a snapshot from the mid to late 90s of this Taft's Corner area versus a more recent, probably 2013 for this area. So I'm going to jump back to my presentation. There it is. And somehow I got off track here, but bear with me. We are right here, and I believe we have now reached the question and answer stage of the presentation, and I think my timing might be good because we got about 15 minutes left, which we don't have to use, but we can. And so I'm going to open it up now to questions, and those questions that can be asked through the question box. Or you can raise your hand. Any questions out there? Okay, we got a question. Excellent. Which is, can I explain caching? Okay, well, I can try to explain caching. So the question is related to services that are cached. And let me try to explain what that means. So when you go to access a service, for example, we've got these services here that we brought into ArcGIS online, and in the naming convention that we've used, you can quickly see that some of these are cached and some aren't, but kind of, well, what's the difference? They all seem to work. Well, it's true. They all do work, and they all will work. Generally speaking, the purpose for cache is to increase performance. So pre-cached tiles generally are going to perform better. And I don't know how well you can see this, but if you give it a try yourself, what you'll generally find is that when you pan using cached services, that they're going to render much more quickly. Now, it's very important to note, though, that when something is cached, what it means is that the map has been pre-rendered at particular scales. So in the case of a web service, this one being has WM there in the name, it's in Web Mercator. And Web Mercator is the default projection that's used out on the web and on the internet. That it's essentially de facto standard, essentially put in place by Google being the first to go big on the web with web maps. And it's cached at particular scales. So you'll notice, for example, like in a web map like this one, you're zooming to predefined scales, and these predefined scales are scales that are part of that Web Mercator standard in terms of common practice. And these caches get cached at these particular scales. And what that allows for then is for very rapid response, because these renderings of the image, in this case it's black and white aerial photo, it could be anything, it could be any kind of map, allows it to render much more quickly. But if you are bringing a cached service into, let's say, ArcGIS, and let's say I bring the Web Mercator cache into ArcGIS and I've set my data frame to something else, such as state plane, now it's actually having to reproject the cache. And so at that point, you've lost any benefit of performance. So it's important to be aware, cache is all about performance, and the best performance really you're going to get is within the context of a browser-based web application. You're going to get the best performance using cached services. Cache services, generally speaking, you cannot change anything. It's pre-baked. There's no turning layers on, turning layers off, that kind of thing. The examples I've shown you so far have been primarily imagery, but if I were to show you examples of others that have multiple layers, if it's pre-cached, you cannot control turning layers on and off. So that's a quick there. Let's see. Somehow I'm trying to, you have to bear with me here as I learn how to navigate the question box. So I see there, is it possible to publish services in ArcGIS Pro? That was a question that came out. I believe so, but I will admit I haven't actually done it myself. So I cannot validate that that's the case, but my understanding would be that you can. I believe that's all the questions I see at this point. Any other questions out there that I can answer? Let me put my contact info back up on the screen. You can certainly always feel free to send me an email, give me a call. If you end up with any questions after the fact, or if you're pulling your hair out because you can't find these services or they're not working the way you expect them to be working, please reach out and either myself or any of my colleagues here at VCGI will do our best to help you out. All right. Unless there are any more questions, I think we're there. I think we've reached the end of the webinar. So thanks to everyone for participating. I appreciate you taking the time to do so. I hope that I provided a little more insight into web services and specifically services that VCGI offers, and provide you some guidance and insight into how you might be able to take advantage of them within your workflows. I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks a lot and take care.